Imagine a lavish, marble-floored mansion drenched in golden chandeliers where a millionaire lounges beside a striking young mistress. A phone buzzes urgently in another room, his pregnant wife's name flashing in bold. But the mistress only laughs with cruel delight as she coaxes him to tap block. Across the city, that very wife clutches at her stomach, breathless from the sudden, terrifying onset of labor. She needs her husband more than ever, yet he remains deaf to her cries. Now, entangled in a swirl of secrets and betrayal, the stage is set for one woman's desperate fight to be heard and another's triumph in a twisted power play. Alexander Royston was a man who appeared to have it all. He was 36 years old, had the face of a classical statue, and possessed enough personal charisma to charm even the most formidable of adversaries. There was no shortage of luxury in his life. His home in Kensington Square boasted 15 rooms, including a private theatre, a sprawling gym, and a personal spa. Expensive artwork, Picasso originals, and Renoir paintings hung from the walls, while oversized windows looked out onto manicured lawns dotted with marble statues. To the outside world, Alexander was the embodiment of success. Newspapers featured him as one of the city's top real estate tycoons. Glossy magazines praised him for charitable work that included donations to the Trevor Donovan Foundation, a prestigious non-profit focusing on child education. Official records stated his net worth soared beyond $800 million. Journalists often ask the same question: how did a relatively young man of humble origins manage to accumulate such a fortune in little more than a decade? But the real enigma lay in Alexander's personal life, hidden behind glitzy galas and philanthropic events. Only a few close confidants knew the name of his pregnant wife, Lily Ann Royston, formerly Lillian Marshall, who spent most of her time away from the limelight. Even fewer people knew about the existence of another woman in Alexander's life, Genevieve Dupont, a dark-haired, sharp-tongued beauty who played a significant role in orchestrating high-stakes real estate deals. She was also Alexander's mistress, and her presence in the mansion was hardly a secret to those in his immediate circle. So how had it come to pass that Alexander, a charming figure admired for his business acumen, found himself ensnared in a scandalous affair? The short answer was that Genevieve provided a rush of excitement he no longer found with Lily. After 7 years of marriage, Lily's world had become consumed by fertility treatments, hospital visits, and perpetual worry. Alexander, once supportive, grew tired of the emotional turmoil and sought an escape in Genevieve's arms. On a warm Tuesday morning, as sunlight spilled through the wide bay windows, Alexander and Genevieve sat in the breakfast nook overlooking a Japanese-style garden. Their conversation drifted from finalizing the contract for a commercial tower in downtown London to planning a getaway in the south of France. What neither of them knew was that at that very moment, Lily was on the phone with her best friend Paige Harrison, tears streaming down her face as she clutched the official pregnancy test results, finally positive after 3 years of heartbreak. Alexander's phone buzzed on the mahogany table. Lily's name lit up the screen. Genevieve, hair impeccably styled, let out a theatrical sigh. "Her again?" she asked, rolling her eyes. Alexander hesitated. Lily rarely called him during business hours unless it was urgent. He had grown used to ignoring her calls, offering half-baked excuses later, but something about the repeated calls unsettled him. With a subtle grimace, he answered. "Hello, darling," he said, forcing cheerfulness into his voice. Lily began, her tone trembling. "I'm pregnant." He blinked, struggling to process the words he had longed to hear, or at least had once longed to hear. He mouthed something unintelligible to Genevieve, who arched a brow, a mocking smile playing on her lips. That's wonderful, Lily, Alexander finally said, feeling a wave of guilt course through him as Genevieve smirked. Yet even in the thrill of such monumental news, Lily sensed a coolness on Alexander's end of the line. It wasn't the jubilant tone she had imagined. She told him she had an appointment with Dr. Angela Bryson at the exclusive Arlington maternity clinic tomorrow. She needed him there. Alexander promised he would make time, though something about Genevieve's piercing gaze told Lily that he was not alone. When the call ended, Alexander turned to Genevieve, whose playful demeanor had melted into something acrid. "Well," she said, pouring herself another cup of coffee, "I guess she finally got what she wanted." Alexander exhaled, torn between excitement, unease, and the magnetic force of Genevieve's presence. In those seconds, he realized that Lily's pregnancy might complicate everything. A child would tether him even more closely to his wife, but the flame he shared with Genevieve still burned fiercely. That night, he tried to celebrate with Lily. He brought her a bouquet of lilies, her namesake, and a pair of diamond earrings. Yet even as she beamed at him, he found himself mentally revisiting Genevieve's mocking laughter. The entire evening was overshadowed by the sense that he was living a double life about to explode into the open. Within a month, Lily's pregnancy advanced to the point where the strain became obvious. She began to experience persistent morning sickness and dizzy spells, spending more and more time resting on the chaise lounge in the living room. Dr. Bryson advised her to avoid stress and recommended a caretaker to assist around the house. But Alexander, wrapped up in real estate negotiations and late-night dinners with Genevieve, rarely came home before midnight. Lily felt the emotional distance growing. Even her father, George Marshall, noticed. He pulled Alexander aside during a casual visit. "Son, you have a beautiful wife here carrying your child," George said gently. "She needs you present, not just physically, but emotionally." Alexander muttered some polite affirmation and changed the topic to business matters. The truth was, each day he spent with Lily felt weighed down by unspoken questions. Could he maintain both relationships, or would he eventually have to choose? Genevieve was well aware of these tensions. Over private dinners in exclusive restaurants, she probed Alexander about his future plans. "Do you really want to be changing diapers in a few months?" she teased. "Where does that leave us?" Alexander found himself unable to form a coherent answer. But Genevieve had a plan. She coaxed him with sweet words and subtle manipulations, painting a vision of a child-free, glamorous life full of travel and financial conquests. Over time, she introduced the idea that Lily's pregnancy might be a burden, a roadblock to the life Alexander truly wanted to live. What if Lily never recovers fully? What if the baby drains your resources and time? Genevieve cooed, her voice laced with feigned concern. Think of what we could accomplish without that kind of anchor holding you down. Alexander began to see Lily's pregnancy as a test, a fork in the road that would dictate the shape of his future. Driven by ambition and seduced by Genevieve's power over him, he allowed himself to believe that Lily's needs were less urgent than his own. Paige Harrison, Lily's longtime confidant, was one of the first to suspect Alexander's affair. She had attended enough social events to catch glimpses of Genevieve's overly familiar manner with him. Paige's fiancé, Ryan Caldwell, confirmed that rumors were circulating among Alexander's business associates, rumors that Genevieve was more than just a high-level consultant. Alarmed, Paige confronted Lily. The conversation took place in Lily's tastefully furnished living room. Sunlight glimmered off an antique mirror, and plush throw pillows adorned a velvet sofa. Lily, visibly worn from her pregnancy, sat cradling a cup of ginger tea. "Lily, you need to tell me the truth. Have you noticed anything strange about Alex and Genevieve?" Page asked gently. Lily's eyes flickered with a mixture of fear and resignation. She revealed that she had found receipts for expensive gifts, jewelry, designer clothes, purchased on Alexander's credit card. None of these items had been gifted to her. She had also spotted text messages from Genevieve's phone number messages, signed with playful winks and kisses. Page's expression hardened. "Are you going to confront him?" she asked. Lily took a deep breath. "I'm afraid of losing him," she admitted. "But I also can't ignore this any longer. There's a baby on the way, Paige. This is the worst possible time for him to stray." Encouraged by Page's support, Lily decided to approach Alexander. Yet as though anticipating her move, Alexander became elusive. He left the house early, returned late, and scheduled weekend business trips with Genevieve under the guise of scouting new properties. Each time Lily tried to pin him down, he would dismiss her with a quick excuse. "He's out of control," Page fumed after another failed confrontation. "You're pregnant, Lily. He should be here doting on you." But Lily was at a crossroads. Her hormones raged, her mind filled with anxieties, and her heart ached with the suspicion that Alexander might already be emotionally gone. If someone wanted to identify the moment everything truly fell apart, they might choose that breezy Saturday afternoon in May when Lily dialed Alexander's number from a friend's baby shower. She was feeling faint, dangerously lightheaded. Her baby bump, now well into the third trimester, made it difficult for her to navigate tight spaces. Hoping Alexander could pick her up, she steadied herself near the venue entrance and pressed the call button. Unbeknownst to her, Alexander's phone lay on a sleek marble table in Genevieve's penthouse, where the couple sipped on expensive champagne. The phone vibrated, Lily's name appearing on the screen. Genevieve caught sight of it first. Again, she scoffed. "She's calling non-stop these days." Alexander, perhaps emboldened by champagne or weary of Lily's constant demands, took his phone and, after a brief hesitation, pressed block. As if it were a joke, Genevieve burst into laughter, raising her crystal flute. "Cheers," she said mockingly, "to your newfound peace." In that moment, Lily's call went to voicemail. She sank onto a curb, tears staining her cheeks. Her head throbbed, but she eventually flagged down a passing taxi, not suspecting that Alexander had just shut off a vital line of communication. A week later, Lily found herself alone in the house on a stormy evening. Lightning streaked across the sky and rain pelted the windows. She was ironing baby clothes, trying to distract herself with menial tasks, when a sharp, stabbing pain coursed through her abdomen. Panic-stricken, she tried calling Alexander, but her calls wouldn't go through. Confusion took hold. Why wasn't she able to reach him? She then attempted to call Paige, but Paige was out of town for a family gathering. She tried her father, George Marshall, who was reachable, but several hours away. Another wave of pain convulsed her, nearly doubling her over. She needed Alexander now more than ever. Meanwhile, across town, Alexander and Genevieve were celebrating the successful signing of a mega deal. The city's largest commercial bank had just financed a new real estate project, and the pair dined at the exclusive Bordeaux lounge. Alexander's phone stayed silent. Lily's number was still blocked, and she could not reach him. At the mansion, Lily finally called an ambulance. Her breathing grew shallow, her face slick with sweat. She clutched the phone and the unborn child in her womb, praying that help would arrive in time. Her life was unraveling in that agonizing moment, yet Alexander was oblivious to her plight, lost in a bubble of indulgence with Genevieve. Paramedics rushed Lily to Arlington Maternity Clinic. Dr. Angela Bryson, the obstetrician who had monitored her pregnancy, immediately took charge. Lily's blood pressure was alarmingly high. She appeared to be in early labor. Worse, there were signs of possible complications with the placenta. In a curt voice, Dr. Bryson asked Lily if any family members or her husband would be arriving soon. Lily explained that she couldn't reach Alexander. The hospital staff tried to call him, but the line didn't connect. Stricken with worry, Lily realized she hadn't updated Paige on her hospital trip. The pains shot through her belly again, more violently this time, and she was whisked away for an emergency C-section. Even in her terror, Lily clung to the hope that Alexander would burst through the doors at the last second, apologizing profusely. But he never came. Hours passed in a blur of surgical lights and anesthetic haze. When Lily finally awoke, exhausted and emotionally shattered, she learned that she had given birth to a baby girl. The infant was placed in an incubator for additional monitoring, as she had arrived prematurely. Lily's emotions swung wildly between joy at the newborn's survival and heartbreak at Alexander's absence. She wanted him there, wanted to see awe in his eyes as he gazed upon his daughter for the first time. Instead, she felt only the cold, lonely silence of an empty hospital room. The next morning, Alexander awoke in Genevieve's apartment. Messages began popping up from Lily's father, George, and from Paige. Unsettled, he skimmed them. George Marshall, 6:02 a.m. Call me ASAP. Something happened with Lily. Paige Harrison, 6:10 a.m. Where are you? Lily is in surgery. Answer your phone. Alarmed Alexander attempted to call Lily. Nothing. He tried again, only to realize he had blocked her number. His heart pounded in his chest. Hastily gathering his clothes, he raced to the hospital. When he entered Lily's room, he found her lying, pale, on the bed, hooked up to IV fluids. Next to her stood George Marshall, face etched with anger, and Paige, who looked furious enough to slap him. You missed the birth of your own child, George's voice thundered across the small room. Where the hell were you? Alexander could barely find the words. He stammered out an apology, but Lily cut him off. Her eyes were brimming with tears. I called you. I needed you, Alex, she whispered. Why did you block me? Alexander's jaw clenched, searching for a lie that might salvage the situation. He couldn't find one. The truth hovered in the room like a dark cloud that his mistress had encouraged him to silence his pregnant wife. Over the next few days, Lily recovered slowly. Their premature baby girl, named Arabella Grace Royston, was kept in an incubator but showed signs of improvement. Alexander tried to visit, but Lily refused to see him. At times, he stood outside the nursery window, pressing a hand against the glass, tears of regret clouding his vision. Paige and George took turns sharing updates. Paige's anger was palpable. Do you have any idea how traumatizing this has been for Lily? She nearly lost the baby last night, and you were nowhere to be found. George delivered the final blow. She needed you, and you turned your back. If you can't be responsible for them, let her go. Alexander was consumed by guilt, a new and terrifying emotion for a man who prided himself on control. At home, he found the mansion eerily silent, as Lily had arranged for a temporary stay at Paige's home once she left the hospital. During sleepless nights, Alexander replayed the sequence of events in his mind: Genevieve's laughter, the champagne, the moment he blocked Lily's calls. Each recollection stabbed him with regret. Yet even then, Genevieve seemed to exude a dangerous allure. She visited him after hearing of the baby's premature arrival. She tried to soothe him. She offered sympathy mixed with subtle hints that Lily's health issues were predictable, a burdensome cost on his life. Alexander felt torn, stuck between guilt over Lily and the mesmerizing force of Genevieve's presence. Unable to bear the limbo, Alexander visited Paige's home. The cozy suburban house with potted plants lining the porch was a stark contrast to his marble-floored mansion. Lily was seated in the living room, holding Arabella. Paige hovered protectively. Alexander approached cautiously, noticing how Lily clutched the infant close. He expected her to scream or throw him out. Instead, she wore an expression of quiet devastation. "I don't want to fight," she said softly, "but I need to know if you love her." Alexander's throat tightened. He glanced at Paige, who stood with folded arms, a silent sentinel. He confessed, "Yes, I had an affair with Genevieve. It started months ago, but it's not as serious as you might think." The words sounded hollow even to him. Lily's composure snapped. "Not serious. She convinced you to block my calls even during an emergency. That's not serious to you." Tears streamed down Lily's cheeks as she handed Arabella to Paige. "I've been living in a fog these last months. I kept hoping you'd return to us, but every time you drifted further away. Now you've placed not just my life, but our baby's life, in danger." Paige watched the exchange, her eyes brimming with empathy for her friend. Alexander tried to apologize, stumbling over half-formed sentences. But Lily raised her hand. "I need space," she said firmly. "I can't even think about reconciliation right now. Just go." Genevieve had never truly expected Lily's pregnancy to threaten her hold on Alexander. She had known wealthy men before, men who lived by their desires rather than their obligations. She assumed Lily's role was to quietly raise the child, while Alexander lived a double life. But after Lily's harrowing ordeal, Alexander's guilt took a firm hold, and he began to distance himself from Genevieve. Late-night texts went unanswered, phone calls were cut short, and he spent more time trying to support Lily from afar. Sensing danger, Genevieve made a bold move. She hosted a lavish dinner at her penthouse, inviting potential business partners, including a well-known financier named Nicholas Faraday, and a new connection from Dubai's real estate market, Mariam Al-Khoury. The aim was to showcase her capabilities and remind Alexander of the power they wielded together. Alexander arrived late, looking sullen and preoccupied. Halfway through the evening, Genevieve pulled him onto the penthouse balcony, where city lights glistened like scattered diamonds. She tried to seduce him, with promises of exclusive deals and an exciting future. "We are unstoppable," she whispered. "You don't want to lose this momentum over a mistake." Alexander's mind flashed to the incubator room, where baby Arabella fought for each breath. He recalled Lily's face, pale with exhaustion, and the betrayal in her eyes. For a moment, he felt nauseated by Genevieve's self-serving theatrics. He squared his shoulders. "I need to be there for my child. Genevieve, He paused, as if the admission might choke him. "I can't keep going like this." Genevieve stared at him, eyes flashing. "So you're leaving me?" Alexander said nothing, but his silence spoke volumes. Genevieve, however, had a trump card. She knew details about certain financial dealings that Alexander preferred to keep hidden: shady offshore accounts, questionable partnerships with foreign investors. She reminded him of these secrets in a quiet, menacing tone. "You might reconsider throwing everything away for a wife who can't even keep your interest," she hissed, leaning close enough that he could smell the expensive perfume clinging to her skin. Or do you want the world to know how you amassed your fortune? Alexander paled, recalling the lengths he had gone to secure certain property deals. Although not strictly illegal, the optics could be disastrous for his public image. A scandal would scare off investors and tarnish his philanthropic facade. He felt trapped by Genevieve's knowledge. Behind them, Nicholas Faraday chatted with Mariam Al-Khoury, oblivious to the private tension crackling on the balcony. Genevieve placed her hand lightly on Alexander's shoulder, a deceptive gesture of affection. "Think very carefully about your next steps," she warned. Desperate and confused, Alexander sought out an old friend, Oliver Hastings, a legal advisor who had once guided Alexander during his early business ventures. Oliver had a reputation for being scrupulous, which made him one of the few people Alexander could trust for honest counsel. They met in a private room at the Garrison Club, a members-only lounge known for its discretion. A roaring fireplace cast flickering shadows on the leather armchairs. Alexander recounted the entire saga, his affair with Genevieve, Lily's emergency, the birth of Arabella, and now Genevieve's blackmail. Oliver listened, intently tapping a fountain pen against a yellow notepad. Finally, he spoke. "First, you need to do the right thing by your wife and child. That's your moral and ethical duty. Second, as far as Genevieve is concerned, we have options. The information she holds over you is damaging, but not necessarily crippling if we manage the narrative carefully." Alexander raked a hand through his hair. "I don't want this to go public," he said, voice tight. "It would destroy Lily. She's already been through so much." Oliver nodded. "Understood. But you must realize that if Genevieve threatens you, she's more likely to strike if she senses weakness. We need a plan to neutralize her leverage." They discussed possible legal avenues, accusations of extortion, defamation lawsuits, but each carried the risk of public exposure. Oliver advised Alexander to gather every piece of information he could about Genevieve's own dealings. "She's been instrumental in your business for years. I'm sure she's not squeaky clean either." For the first time in weeks, Alexander felt a flicker of hope that he might extricate himself from the toxic entanglement. Meanwhile, Lily recuperated at home, slowly regaining her strength. Arabella remained in the NICU, improving steadily. Lily visited daily, singing lullabies in a soft voice, while a nurse helped feed the infant. In the quiet hours, Lily found herself reflecting on her own life choices. She realized she had been living in Alexander's shadow for years, compromising her own dreams for the sake of his career. She thought back to the early days of their relationship, when Alexander was a rising star in real estate, and she was finishing her master's degree in art history. She had given up a fellowship opportunity at the British Museum to travel with him, supporting his ambitions. Now, she felt a surge of renewed determination. She confided in Paige, "I can't go back to being that woman who just waits around for his scraps of attention," Lily said, her eyes set with a new edge of steel. "If he wants to be a father, he has to prove it. If not, Arabella and I will manage on our own." Paige encouraged Lily to speak with a family law attorney. "You need to understand your rights, financial support, custody arrangements, everything," Paige insisted. Reluctant but resolved, Lily met with a lawyer named Harriet Collins, recommended by a friend. Harriet was a forthright woman with a sharp intellect. She explained that Lily could file for separation or even divorce. Given the affair and the emotional distress, Lily stood on solid legal ground for spousal support and child support. Lily found a calm reassurance in Harriet's words. For the first time, she felt that she had real choices, not just the illusions of a gilded cage. As Oliver Hastings discreetly investigated Genevieve's background, he unearthed a series of questionable transactions tied to her name. He discovered that Genevieve had been skimming profits from Alexander's developments, siphoning them into her own offshore accounts. She had cleverly masked her tracks, but not well enough to escape Oliver's meticulous scrutiny. Armed with this evidence, Oliver arranged a private meeting with Genevieve, inviting her to a neutral venue, the executive lounge of the Harrington Hotel. She arrived dressed in her usual designer ensemble, a confident smile plastered on her face. Oliver wasted no time. He pushed a folder across the table containing printouts of bank transfers and corporate records. Genevieve's face went rigid as she skimmed through them. "You thought you could blackmail Alexander with secrets," Oliver said, coolly. "But you forgot you had secrets of your own." Genevieve's eyes flickered with panic, then cunning. "I can spin these," she claimed, forcing a smirk. "I'll say Alexander authorized these transfers. You have no proof otherwise." Oliver steepled his fingers. "Oh, but we do. We have more than enough evidence to establish that you acted independently, manipulating the accounting. If this goes public, you'd face criminal investigations, potentially jail time." Genevieve's composure cracked. She sipped her drink, hands trembling slightly. "What do you want?" she asked in a hushed tone. "Simple," Oliver replied. "You leave Alexander and Lily alone. No more blackmail. No attempts to contact the media. In return, we keep this under wraps. But if you try anything, I will personally see to it that these files land on the desk of the Serious Fraud Office." Genevieve stared at him, her mind racing. "I need some time to think," she said, grabbing her handbag and exiting. A small, satisfied smile played on Oliver's lips. He had placed the ball in Genevieve's court, confident she would not risk a legal maelstrom. For Alexander, it was a crucial step in dismantling her hold over him. That same day, Alexander visited Lily at Paige's home, invited only because Lily wanted to discuss the future. Arabella was still in the hospital, but Lily had received the news that the baby might come home in a week if her progress continued. They sat across from each other in Paige's living room, an awkward tension filling the space. Alexander cleared his throat. "I'm sorry for everything," he began, voice shaky. "I was selfish and blind. I can't change what happened, but I want to be a father to Arabella." Lily's eyes were calm but guarded. "What about Genevieve?" Alexander explained Oliver's discovery, how he now had leverage to keep Genevieve at bay. "I've ended it with her, Lily. For good." She searched his face for sincerity. Slowly she inhaled, steadying her emotions. "I love our daughter, and I used to love you without question," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "But trust is like glass. Once shattered, even if you glue it back, the cracks remain." Alexander nodded, tears gathering in his eyes. "I'll do anything to make it up to you. Therapy, counseling, whatever it takes. I need you to know I'm committed to you and Arabella. And I understand if you can't forgive me immediately or ever." For a moment, Lily's stoic resolve wavered. She closed her eyes, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I don't know what the future holds for us," she admitted, "but for Arabella's sake, let's try. We'll start with counseling. If you break my trust again, we're done." Alexander reached out to hold her hand, but she hesitated before placing hers in his. They stayed like that for several silent moments, the weight of their shared history bearing down on them. Over the next few weeks, Alexander and Lily embarked on the painstaking process of rebuilding. They attended marital counseling sessions with Dr. Felicity Norman, a psychologist who specialized in helping couples recover from infidelity. The therapy was grueling, filled with emotional confrontations. Lily detailed how alone and betrayed she felt, while Alexander expressed guilt and confusion over his own actions. At home, Lily remained cautious, refusing to move back into Alexander's mansion. Instead, she stayed at Paige's residence until she could decide whether to find her own place. Alexander spent his days juggling business responsibilities and evening hospital visits, sitting beside Arabella's incubator to watch her tiny chest rise and fall. In those quiet moments in the NICU, Alexander found a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. He spoke to Arabella in hushed tones, telling her stories of his childhood in Yorkshire, of how he had dreamed of making something of himself. He promised her that he would be a better man, someone worthy of the fatherhood bestowed upon him. Lily sometimes stood outside the glass walls, observing Alexander. Despite her lingering mistrust, she saw genuine love in his eyes when he looked at Arabella. Genevieve Dupont, now cornered by Oliver's evidence, faced a bleak decision. She could either vanish quietly from Alexander's life and risk losing the luxurious lifestyle she had grown accustomed to, or she could attempt one final gamble. At a discreet cafe near Hyde Park, she arranged to meet with a gossip columnist, Daniel Prescott, infamous for selling sensational stories to top tabloids. She carried a flash drive containing photos of her and Alexander, along with a folder of questionable financial documents that she believed might implicate Alexander. Her plan was to profit from a scandal, ensuring that if she was going down, she would take Alexander with her. Perhaps the tabloids would pay enough money to fund her escape. But Oliver had anticipated this. One of his associates, posing as a cafe patron, snapped pictures of Genevieve sliding files across the table to Daniel. Before the meeting could conclude, a pair of men approached them, discreetly identifying themselves as private investigators working for Oliver Hastings. They intercepted the handover, threatening legal action for conspiracy and blackmail. Genevieve, her face drained of color, realized she had no escape. Daniel, sensing trouble, bolted from the cafe, leaving her to face the consequences alone. The next day, Genevieve received a formal notice from Oliver's law firm, warning her that any further attempts to defame or blackmail Alexander would be met with a lawsuit. Cornered on all fronts, Genevieve decided to leave the country, booking a one-way flight to Monaco. Arabella was finally deemed healthy enough to leave the hospital. The day she was discharged, Lily, Alexander, and Paige gathered around the NICU exit. A nurse handed Arabella to Lily, who cradled her gently. Alexander stood by, tears in his eyes, deeply moved by the tiny life he had almost lost through his callous actions. They drove to Paige's home, where Arabella's bassinet waited. In a tender moment, Lily allowed Alexander to hold the baby. He marveled at how small and delicate she was, feeling an overwhelming surge of protective love. Watching him cradle Arabella, Lily felt a glimmer of the affection she once cherished. However, the memory of Genevieve's mocking laugh still echoed in her mind. It would take more than fatherly devotion to heal the wounds inflicted upon her trust. In the weeks that followed, Alexander took steps to demonstrate his commitment. He offered to transfer the deed of a newly purchased townhouse into Lily's name, providing her and Arabella a secure residence separate from his mansion. Though Lily hesitated at first, she eventually accepted, viewing it as a gesture that Alexander was finally willing to put her needs above his own convenience. They continued marital counseling, delving deeper into issues of communication, emotional support, and betrayal. It was an uphill battle. Lily's anger and resentment still simmered beneath the surface. Alexander struggled with shame, grappling with the fact that his affair nearly cost him his family. But slowly, day by day, they found small moments of unity, like when Arabella gurgled happily, her tiny fist curling around Alexander's pinky finger, or when Lily found a handwritten letter from Alexander under her pillow expressing remorse and gratitude. She read it late at night, tears slipping onto the paper, uncertain yet hopeful. Autumn had swept across London, painting the trees of Kensington in shades of fire and gold. The air had turned crisp, and the days grew shorter. It was the kind of season Lily used to love: long walks, cozy scarves, warm cups of coffee. But this year it carried a different weight. Everything felt new, fragile, uncertain. Alexander invited her for a walk in Hyde Park one Saturday morning. It was his idea, not a gesture dressed in romance, but in quiet respect. No pressure, he had said. Just a walk, just us. Lily hesitated, then agreed. They strolled through the winding paths, Arabella tucked into her stroller, bundled in a knit blanket. The leaves crunched beneath their feet as they passed other young families, joggers and dog walkers. For a while they said nothing, just listened to the wind, rustling through the trees. Eventually, they stopped by the Serpentine Lake. The water shimmered beneath the overcast sky, and Lily stood at the railing, watching her reflection ripple with the breeze. Alexander moved beside her, his hands resting on the stroller handle. "I never thought I could feel this again," he said softly. "Feel what this contentment. Like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." Lily didn't respond right away. Her gaze remained fixed on the water. "It's hard to believe in those moments again," she admitted. "Every time I let myself relax, I remember how it felt, lying in that hospital room, wondering if you would ever show up." His shoulders tensed. "I know, and I don't expect that memory to fade. I don't want it to. It's the price of what I did. I just want to keep showing you over and over that I'm not that man anymore." There was a long pause between them, filled only by the soft gurgles of Arabella playing with the corner of her blanket. "I've been going to therapy," Alexander added almost nervously. "Alone, I mean, trying to figure out how I became someone capable of hurting the people I love the most." That caught Lily off guard. She looked at him, really looked, and for a brief second saw past the history, the betrayal, the guilt, and saw a man stripped bare of pretense. "I don't know if I'll ever fully trust you again," she said honestly. "I don't know either," he replied, "but I'm willing to earn whatever pieces of trust you'll let me hold." They walked a bit further, Arabella drifting into sleep beneath the canopy of gold and amber leaves. And in that slow, quiet walk, without grand gestures or declarations, Lily felt something stir in her chest. Not forgiveness, not yet, but the faintest glimmer of possibility. They were no longer the couple who once danced beneath chandeliers or smiled for society pages. They were two broken people trying to build something real. And maybe, just maybe, that was more meaningful than anything they had before. Nothing tests a fragile reconciliation quite like fear. And when Arabella developed a sudden cough one evening, followed by a low-grade fever, and labored breathing, Lily's heart dropped into her stomach. She didn't hesitate. Within minutes, she had Arabella bundled into a blanket and was out the door, calling Alexander from the car. "Meet me at St. Clair's," she said, her voice tight with panic. "Something's wrong." Alexander didn't ask questions. He simply said, "I'm on my way," and hung up. At the hospital, time slowed to a crawl. Doctors admitted Arabella overnight for observation, suspecting a mild respiratory infection. Lily stayed by the crib, clutching her daughter's tiny hand, while machines beeped steadily nearby. Fear gripped her but so did something else, an old ache resurfacing. The memory of being alone in a hospital bed once before, abandoned, forgotten, but this time was different. Alexander arrived within 20 minutes, breathless and still in his work clothes. He didn't sit down. He went straight to the nurse's station, asking for updates. He made sure Lily had water, that she'd eaten, that she had a blanket if she needed to rest. When she refused to leave Arabella's side, he pulled up a chair beside her and simply stayed. At one point, Lily glanced over to see him slumped in his seat, his head resting on the edge of the crib, eyes shut, but his hand still gently placed over Arabella's. The sight stopped her breath. This man, who had once chosen silence over responsibility, now looked like he hadn't slept in days, consumed by a devotion he had once buried beneath ego and ambition. She reached out instinctively, laying her hand lightly over his. He stirred, looking up, with bloodshot eyes. "I'm not going anywhere," he whispered, as if sensing her thoughts. "Not this time." Lily didn't reply. She didn't need to. By morning, Arabella's condition had stabilized. Doctors said it had been precautionary, that her lungs were clear, and she'd be fine with rest and care at home. Relief hit Lily like a wave, but so did something else, an unexpected sense of unity. They had faced a crisis, and this time, Alexander had shown up. Back at home, Lily watched him move around the nursery with practiced ease, adjusting the humidifier, disinfecting toys, gently rocking Arabella back to sleep. The man who once let her cries go unanswered now hovered like a fortress. She stepped forward, placing her hand on his shoulder. He looked back, searching her face for judgment or maybe permission. Instead, she simply said, "Thank you." It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a beginning. In that soft, silent moment, surrounded by pastel wallpaper and lullabies humming from a baby monitor, they stood side by side, no longer opponents, no longer fractured parents. Just two people trying to learn how to be whole again for the one life they had created together. Time, as it often does, moved forward, not in sweeping gestures, but in quiet, unassuming moments. Arabella had grown from a fragile newborn into a bubbly infant, full of laughter and curiosity. And with each passing week, Lily's world felt a little less like it was held together by splintered glass. She and Alexander had reached a delicate truce, an agreement built not on promises, but on presence. He visited daily, always punctual, always prepared. At first, it was just to see Arabella, but slowly the visits stretched longer. He'd help with dinner, read bedtime stories, and sometimes fall asleep in the armchair beside the crib, lulled by the rhythm of domestic routine. Eventually, Lily offered him a spare room for weekends. It wasn't reconciliation, it was practicality. But underneath the surface, something was stirring, a faint hum of hope. Alexander had changed, not in grand dramatic ways, but in the quiet consistency of his actions. He no longer flinched when Lily needed space. He no longer defended the past. Instead, he showed up day after day with no expectations. Genevieve had become a ghost, a name neither of them spoke anymore. She had vanished into the folds of high society. Somewhere along the Riviera, her last attempt at contact, a single email, "We could have ruled the world together." Alexander had read it once, then deleted it without replying. His silence was final. Lily, for her part, had grown into herself again. She took up freelance art consulting, curating gallery shows, and writing exhibition notes with the same sharp eye she had once buried beneath marriage and motherhood. Paige beamed with pride, always her loudest cheerleader. Even George Marshall, initially skeptical, softened. He made peace with Alexander in his own way by coming over to play with Arabella, by letting Lily decide the terms of their new family dynamic. "I'll support you," he'd told her, "as long as you're not sacrificing your happiness for someone else's mistakes." Therapy continued, and so did the difficult conversations. Alexander listened more now. He didn't interrupt when Lily recalled how deeply she'd been hurt. He didn't flinch when she admitted she still had nightmares of being alone in that hospital room, abandoned. "I don't expect you to forget," he said one evening, "but I'll keep proving I'm worth another chance." Lily didn't respond with words. Instead, she placed a photo of Arabella on his nightstand, a subtle gesture, but one that meant more than any speech. Their marriage was still fragile, patched together like a mosaic. But every broken piece had its place, forming something unexpectedly beautiful. Lily no longer needed Alexander to complete her, but she was beginning to believe they could rebuild something worth holding on to, not for the sake of their past, but for the future they could still create. A year had passed since Arabella entered the world under a shroud of pain and betrayal, and in that time, everything had changed slowly, quietly, and piece by piece. The sunlit garden behind the townhouse was in full bloom, daisies and roses swaying in the soft breeze as a small group of close friends and family gathered under a trellis draped with ivy. There was no orchestra, no tabloid photographers, no designer gowns this time, just sincerity raw and unpolished. Lily stood in a flowing cream dress, her eyes shimmering with something not quite joy, not quite sorrow, something deeper. Across from her, Alexander stood in a simple navy suit, clutching a ring he'd once thought he'd never have the right to place on her finger again. They had decided together to renew their vows, not as a grand gesture, but as a quiet redemption. A chance to acknowledge the ashes they had walked through and the slow, painful way they'd rebuilt something real. Paige stood proudly as Lily's maid of honor, dabbing at her eyes every few minutes, while Oliver Hastings watched from a nearby bench, offering Alexander a subtle nod of support. Even George Marshall, once hardened with disappointment, now held Arabella in his arms with a quiet, grandfatherly pride. Alexander's voice trembled as he spoke his vows, not from nerves, but from the weight of the words. "I betrayed your trust, lost my way, and nearly lost the two people who matter most. But I've spent every day since trying to become the man who deserves you both. I promise to keep choosing you, even on the hardest days." Lily's voice was steadier, but no less emotional. "We don't stand here pretending the past didn't happen. We stand here because it did, and we survived it. You hurt me deeply, but you also changed. You stayed, you listened, and you never stopped trying. I vow to move forward with you, not as the woman I was, but as the woman I've become." Their toddler Arabella provided a moment of levity as she toddled across the aisle mid-ceremony, giggling at the rose petals on the ground. The guests laughed softly, the moment breaking the emotional tension like sunlight parting clouds. Later, as they shared a modest toast in the garden, Lily looked around and realized something powerful. This small, humble ceremony meant more than the extravagant wedding they'd had years ago. This time, it wasn't about appearances. It was about healing, rebuilding, quiet redemption. She and Alexander weren't the same people they had once been. Their love wasn't flawless, but it was resilient. And in that resilience lay a kind of beauty she had never expected. And as the last of the guests left, and Arabella drifted off to sleep inside, Lily stood beside Alexander under the fading golden light and whispered, "This time, let's get it right." He nodded, his voice low. No more second chances, just one long, steady walk forward. As the seasons turned and Arabella took her first wobbly steps across the townhouse's sunlit living room, life for Lily and Alexander found a new, steadier rhythm. It wasn't perfect, far from it, but it was real. The kind of real that comes after the storm has passed and you're left picking up broken pieces, deciding which ones are still worth holding on to. Alexander had shifted in ways even he hadn't expected. His calendar no longer revolved around high-stakes boardrooms or gala events. Instead, he found his greatest joy in early mornings spent reading Goodnight Moon to Arabella, or in the quiet routine of warming a bottle while Lily dozed on the couch after a long day. Business still existed, of course it did, but his approach had changed. It was no longer about being the biggest name in real estate. Now, it was about being present, being dependable, being the man Lily and Arabella deserved. Lily, too, was blossoming. She had fully stepped into her role as an independent art consultant, curating exhibitions with a discerning eye and elegant confidence. Clients praised her for her taste, but also for her strength, a quiet resilience that radiated from her like a second skin. She no longer introduced herself as Mrs. Royston. She was simply Lily in her own right, and yet scars lingered. There were still moments, usually late at night, when Arabella was asleep and the house was too quiet, when the past crept in. Lily would remember the hospital corridor, her phone calls going unanswered, Genevieve's name carved like ice into her memory. The pain never disappeared completely, but it didn't define her anymore. Alexander never tried to erase the past. Instead, he honored it. When Lily woke from a nightmare, he didn't dismiss it. He held her, whispered his remorse, and reminded her over and over that he was there to stay, that every day was a promise he intended to keep. Their love wasn't naive anymore. It had been battered, bruised, and nearly destroyed. But what remained was stronger, not because it was perfect, but because they had chosen it again and again, in spite of everything. One rainy afternoon, as Arabella giggled while chasing raindrops on the window pane, Lily turned to Alexander and said softly, "I never thought we'd get here." He looked at her, eyes gentle. "Neither did I, but I'm grateful every day that we did." Their story had changed. It was no longer about betrayal and mistrust. It had become a testament to the power of rebuilding, of showing up, of choosing forgiveness, not as an act of forgetting, but as a brave leap toward a future worth fighting for. Thank you for joining us on this emotional journey through betrayal, heartbreak, and renewal. Lily and Alexander's story reminds us that even when life's storms seem insurmountable, the strongest relationships can sometimes be rebuilt on the rubble of shattered trust. Betrayal may leave deep wounds, but through courage, honesty, and relentless love, healing is possible. The greatest lesson is that true love requires constant effort, unwavering support, and the willingness to face our darkest truths. If you found this story riveting and full of valuable lessons, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who might need inspiration, and subscribe to this channel for more real-life dramas and heart-stirring narratives. Every click and comment helps us bring you more stories of resilience, redemption, and the power of hope. Thank you for watching, and remember, love can still triumph after even the stormiest night.